Welcome to Le Grand Voyage with Chateau Melodique Le Gravière. Today we're going to talk about buying wine, but not in a shop. In fact, it's not even in a bottle. And the winemaker hasn't finished making it. It's a curiously Bordeaux phenomenon called buying wine en primeur. The principle of buying wine en primeur is quite simple. It's essentially a form of wine futures. In the spring, you, the customer, buy the previous year's wine whilst it's still in its barrel. It gives you a chance to get in early and secure a few cases, pretty much as soon as it's finished fermenting, but long before it hits the shelves. You pay up front, and that gives the chateau a chance to get some cash in early too. And ideally the wines will be considerably cheaper than when they're bottled in 18 months' time or so, when they're finally shipped and sold over the counter, or more likely these days on the phone or the internet. This last bit means it's also a form of speculation, I guess. This makes a thing called En Primeur Week especially important. This is when lots of wine merchants and wine journalists descend on Bordeaux to travel around the different chateaux tasting wine. These wine merchants will write up their notes and use the notes to try and sell the wines when they get home. As their notes are designed to sell the wine, they are unlikely to be fiercely objective, if you get me. A perfect vintage can mean that they're gently softening you up to open your wallet a little wider this year. A challenging vintage means you should maybe be a little bit more selective in what you choose. Will reward time in a cellar, that's good. And it means that you possibly shouldn't buy this wine if you're much over 40, because the tannins will soften up for your grandchildren, although buy it for them, it's a lovely gift. The other group who go to Bordeaux En Primeur Week are wine journalists. Their job is to provide a more objective assessment of the vintage and its wines. You might imagine that these journalists are all great friends and very supportive of each other, but there is real competition to be had as the authoritative voice of Bordeaux. This makes the person who makes the market very important. So their notes will boil down to essentially a very highly irregular verb. I'm right, you are wrong, he's deluded, it's refined, we were pleasantly surprised, you should buy them. They will sell quickly, so registering your interest early is well advised. Now, you could just buy for your own drinking pleasure, and lots of people do, but I mentioned that buying en primeur was also a form of speculation. Well, in the old days, Bordeaux en primeur, it was a brilliant way really to do three things, depending on the vintage. In reasonable years, you'd buy low during en primeur and you'd sell high a few years later. And in between, you'd make enough money to buy for the few cases that you kept for yourself. Essentially, you'd get the wine you keep for free, and possibly even a weekend on the Isle of Wight for you and the family over the summer holidays. In really excellent years, you'd make so much on your sale, you'd be able to pay for next year's school or university fees in cash. In less good vintages, even so, you'd still have a cellar of great wine to crack open every Christmas. Now, I really do recommend you have a go. Buy a couple of cases of a chateau that you like and enjoy the ride, but be cautious of getting too carried away. In spring of 2009, a friend of mine bought 100 cases of the 2008 vintage of Chateau Lafite Rothschild. It cost him around £210,000. Now, we'd meet once a year at a charity dinner. A year later, I asked him how his £210,000 investment in Lafite was getting on. Well, it certainly wasn't £210,000 anymore. In the previous year, it had gone up about 700%, making it about 1.4 million. But over the course of the next few annual meetups, those 100 cases of wine went from about 1.4 million to 750,000. That's how upset my friend was. It turned out he wasn't upset at all. He'd sold pretty much at the top of the curve. But that, of course, means that there were people out there who'd picked up maybe a case or two where each bottle was worth £1,200. But they then found out a couple of years later their investment was worth a bit over £400. That brings us to the most important point about en primeur, about Bordeaux, about wine in general. It's for drinking, it's for sharing, it's for enjoying. Wherever, whenever you buy a bottle of Bordeaux, buy it for the pleasure. That's what it's there for. Join me again tomorrow for another story from Bordeaux with Chateau Malati La Gravière. I'll see you then.